Well, I'm so glad you guys are here with us today. Before we jump into today's content, let me just kind of take a time out real quick. And you probably didn't know this, but I just want to tell you something that I think that is incredible that's happening here over the last few days. Across all of our locations, we've got 600 high school students and their leaders who are at our fall retreat. And we are seeing, I just want to kind of highlight that because I think it's amazing what we're seeing here at our church in this movement of students that God is raising up, where students are finding and discovering what it means to live a God-first life in a me-first world, where high school students are finding their tribe and experiencing what it means to follow Jesus together. And so we are just thrilled about what God is doing in our student ministry. And let me just kind of point out a couple things to you real quick, because that's amazing having that many kids, that many students away at a retreat. So here's the thing. If you serve in any of our student ministry environments, no matter what location you're at, if you serve in any of our student ministry environments as a parent, let me just say on behalf of all parents, thank you. Because we need you. We need your voice speaking into our kids' lives. And then the other thing I just want to tell you, if you've given even a penny to our church, I hope you know that your money is creating environments where students' lives are being changed. And I just want to ask you, and so I just want to say thank you for your generosity, because we're seeing things happen that I think are incredible. And so would you just join me in praying over these next few days for all of these high school students that are at this fall retreat, that this would be a catalytic moment in their faith journey. I'm believing that by faith that that's going to happen. And so just join me in praying for them. And if you see a leader in student ministry, give them a big old hug, because they probably need it after this weekend. So, all right, let me just tell you real quick. We're wrapping up our series today called I Quit. And what we've been doing over the course of this series is we've been looking at different things. And if we're serious, or if we're wanting and desiring to step into the life that God is inviting us into, there are certain things we're going to have to quit. There's things we're going to have to just leave behind. And so we've been talking about those. We've said that we're going to have to leave behind making excuses. We're going to have to quit making excuses. We're going to have to quit complaining. We're going to have to quit comparing, which is so hard to do at times. And today I just want to talk about one last thing that we're going to have to quit. We are going to have to quit fear. We're going to have to quit being afraid. I mean, let's just be honest. There is so much in our world to be afraid of. In fact, we Googled this week, we Googled different phobias. You know, the list of phobias, it is a mile long. And let me just kind of point out, here's a couple of phobias. My guess is some of these phobias are real for some of you. And so I'm going to just see if you know what some of these are. If any of these phobias describe you, just yell or scream or do something. You probably will anyways if it's really a phobia. So here's one, pupophobia. I don't even know how to pronounce this one. Pupophobia, poopophobia, I don't know. You know what this one is? It's the fear of puppets. Yeah, that's nasty. Look at that. That's messed up. All right, here's another one. Someone clapped. Yeah. Ophidiophobia. You know what that one is? Ophidiophobia? That's a fear of snakes. Oh, we got some ugh in that one. All right, that's good. Here's another one. Coulrophobia. This is my favorite. You know what this one is? Fear of clowns. So creepy. Okay. Arachnophobia. Yeah, someone cheered. Kind of odd. All right. So there's fear of spiders. All right. Here's another one. I think that's how you say it. Lalapsophobia. You know what this one is? It's a fear of tornadoes. Now, this one's kind of funny a little bit because this is real from my home. My daughter, Sienna, when she was little, she was like 3 or 4 years old, she had this apparently. We didn't know it was called this at the time, but she became petrified of tornadoes. I don't know why. She got stuck on tornadoes. The problem is, she didn't call them tornadoes, she called them tomatoes. And so one day she was at preschool, and she looks out of the window at preschool and she sees these storm clouds forming. And so she goes up to her teacher and says, "Do we have tomatoes in Pennsylvania?" And her teacher says, "Yeah." And Sienna says, "Do we ever have them in our town?" And her teacher says, "Absolutely." And she says, "Will we have any tomatoes today?" And her teacher says, "I can guarantee you we will around lunchtime." I've got a fund that I'm just putting money in right now for counseling one day for my kids, and this is why. Now, I don't know what your fears are. I don't know if it's lalapsophobia or whatever it might be, but we got to talk about fear. We want to talk today about how to leave fear behind, how to quit fear, how to quit being afraid. And today, we're not going to talk about these kinds of fears, right? These kinds of phobias, right? Those are good, but I can't help you with that, right? I today want to talk about the kinds of fears that are actually invisible. They're the invisible kinds of forces that tend to erupt down inside of us, where fear wells up inside of us over things like our fear of rejection. You can't see these, but they are real. Our fear of rejection, fear of loss, for some of us, fear of death, fear of failure. And these fears are real for some of us. These fears sort of erupt inside of our life. And what I want you to know today, believe it or not, you can live without fear. There is a way to live without fear. In fact, this becomes a dominant theme in all the Bible. In fact, there's one command in the Bible that is given more than any other command. And it might surprise you what it is. And there's one command that Jesus gives more than any other command. You know what it is? It's this: do not be afraid. That's the most common command in the entire Bible. It's the most common command that Jesus gives. 366 times that's in the Bible. One for every day of the year, plus leap year. It's serious, because this is a real issue. And Jesus picks up on this, and Jesus invites his disciples, invites his followers into this: do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And Jesus keeps pounding this home, and Jesus keeps, beating this drum. Do not be afraid. And he keeps doing miracles to demonstrate that he has power over fear. And he walks on water, and he calms storms. And after he does these miracles, he comes to his disciples and says, don't be afraid. And he reinforces it with this profound statement right here. This is in Mark chapter 6. He says, don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here. Don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here. But his first followers don't pick up on this. They don't get it. And they don't let this sink down into their bones, and they don't live courageously. And all the teachings that Jesus gives, and all the times Jesus tries to implore them, don't be afraid, take courage, I'm here, and all the miracles he does, apparently this doesn't do it. They don't step out in courage. And we know that they don't step out in courage because we know what happens at the end of Jesus' life. Jesus is facing the moment in his life where the fear is erupting inside of him, where he is walking towards the cross. And it is his moment of greatest need. And what do his followers, who've been with him now for years, hearing him beat this drum, don't be afraid, take courage, I'm here. They've seen the miracles he can do, and what do they do when Jesus needs them most? They bail. They run. They flee. In fact, one of them runs away so fast, he leaves his clothes behind. Seriously, it's in the Bible. They deny. They lie. They say they don't even know Jesus. Why? Because they're terrified. Because they're afraid. And they are paralyzed in their fear at this moment. And there's one story I just want to look at with you. And we kind of pick it up here at this moment. Jesus died on Friday. Remember, they're terrified. And we find them in this moment. This is Sunday evening by this point. It's Sunday night. So a few days have gone by. And they are obviously paralyzed in their fear. Look what it says. This is written by John. John was there. John was in the room. He saw this happen, and he wants us to know the events that took place on this evening. He says, that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors. Why are they locked? Because they were what? Afraid. They were afraid of the Jewish leaders. And the reason they were afraid of the Jewish leaders is because they saw what the Jewish leaders had done to Jesus just a few days before this. And it terrified them. And here they are, locked up now. They're behind locked doors, cowered in fear. Why? Because the circumstances have shifted. Everything they thought they knew about Jesus, everything they thought they knew about the world, everything they thought they knew about life, it had been in the last 48, 72 hours, been turned and flipped on its head. The circumstances changed, and it dredged up all sorts of fear inside of them. You ever had the circumstances shift in your life to the point you ever entered into a season, you ever entered into a moment of your life where you felt completely out of control and you were terrified because of that? For some of you, you were on a plane and you hit turbulence and you realized, I have no control over this, and something inside, you felt all sorts of fear. For some of you, you got stuck in a storm and you realized, I have no control right now, and it was terrifying to you. For some of you, it was when you got the diagnosis and you realize you have no control. And you're looking at possible death and you don't know what you're going to do. And it's terrifying. For some of you, it wasn't your diagnosis, it was a loved one. You realize you're completely out of control. You ever felt that? And those fears make themselves known? That's how they feel in this moment. That's how they feel. And you know, if you've ever felt that, you know what happens when those fears sort of get dredged up inside of us. All of a sudden, we begin to give ourselves over to worry and control. That's sort of always the symptoms of fear, worry and control. You think about that. Worry is always filled, it's always sort of masked with these what-if sort of thoughts that begin to go through our head. What if, what if, what if, what if, what if? And it's obvious here that they're playing out all sorts of what-ifs. These disciples are like, well, what if the Jewish leaders do to us what they did to Jesus? And what if the Jewish leaders find us? And what if this and what if that? And some of you know this because you've lived in this. Like, what if the cancer comes back? And what if he doesn't change? And what if she doesn't follow through? And what if the company downsizes? And what if I don't make the team? And what if I don't get into the school? And you play all these what-if scenarios out because there's some sort of fear driving it. And anytime those what-ifs begin to take over our minds because of fear, we inevitably then try to control the what-ifs. That's our way of trying to control the problem, right? Our fears will lead to what-ifs, and then we'll try to control it. I mean, the disciples here, it's obvious how they try to control it. They lock the doors. Just try to mitigate the risk, right? Just lock the doors. And we try to control in all sorts of ways. Some of you got hurt a long time ago in life. Some of you were in a relationship with someone, or you had a family member or someone that you trusted, and they betrayed that trust, and they did something, and you ever since then, you don't want to experience that anymore. And you're afraid that if you trust too much, or if you're too vulnerable, or if you open up too much, or you connect too deeply, that whoever you're connecting with, whoever you open up to, they may betray that trust as well. And so you know what the easiest thing to do, right? You've got all those what ifs, like what if they hurt me like that person did? You know what the easiest thing to do? Lock the door. I'm not opening up like that again. I'm not making myself vulnerable like that again. That's control. Some of you, you stepped out at one point in your life. You risked something. You took a risk and you stepped out and it didn't work and it failed. And you have all sorts of shame over that. And so you just made up your mind. And again, maybe it wasn't even a conscious decision. It's just, you just sort of subconsciously or unconsciously said, I'm not doing that again because I don't like that feeling. I'm afraid I'll fail. So what do? You lock the door. Not risking anymore. Not trying. And so you leave all the opportunities and what could be, you forfeit all of that. Because you play the safe game, and you just lock the door to the room. And that's where we find these disciples. And that's where some of you find yourselves here today. Locked in a room, safe, no doubt about it, you're safe. Not dying, they're not going to die, but certainly not living. Because who's trapped? And see, this is why this matters so much to God. This is why this is so prevalent in Jesus and what he wants us to know. It's because you cannot be free and live in fear. You can't. And Jesus is for our freedom. And you can't be free and live in fear. And the disciples have forgotten. They have forgotten in this moment that Jesus came along and said, don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here. I'm here. They forgot that until the very next moment. Because look what happens next. Suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them. Now you want to talk about being terrified. And I don't know how long. I imagine Jesus immediately had to jump in and be like, don't forget, peace be with you. Peace be with you, which is a way of saying, it's all right. And I love this because you might think that Jesus shows up at this moment, finds them in his fear, because think about what Jesus said. Jesus meets them in their fear. He steps into the room that they've locked themselves in because they're terrified. He meets them in their fear. And when he meets them in their fear, he doesn't condemn them. He doesn't shame them. He doesn't say, you idiots. I just spent all these years with you telling you not to be afraid, take courage because I am here. You saw what I can do. You saw me walk on water. Have you forgotten? And here you are locked in a room. He doesn't do that. No, he meets them in fear and says, peace be with you. In other words, it's all right. I know you're scared. It's okay. It's all right. I'm here. I'm here. It's almost like he's saying, I know your circumstances have changed, but I haven't. I'm here. And they must have thought he was a ghost, because look what happens next. It says, as he spoke, he showed them his wounds, the wounds in his hands and his side. He's like, look, it's not a mirage. You're not hallucinating. Come here, come on. You can touch my wounds here. You want to see, look, it's me. And they were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. Now, I find this little detail that John adds. Remember, he's in the room. He's seeing this, and he wants us to know. And I find it fascinating that he adds this detail here. And part of the reason that I find it fascinating that this little detail is not only when Jesus showing them his wounds, not only is Jesus proving to them definitively that he is physically alive, that he has beaten death. Not only is he proving to them that he is alive, he is also at that same time, think about this, he's reminding them about what happened to him. Look what happened to me. Now here's why I find that interesting and a little bit ironic. Because if you're going to come to these guys who are locked up in a room and you're going to try to inspire them to be courageous, you might not want to remind them of what may lie on the other side of those doors, should they leave. But see, fundamental to when Jesus says, don't be afraid, take courage, I'm here, fundamental is what he's not saying. Think about this. Jesus doesn't say, don't be afraid, take courage, and you won't be hurt. Doesn't say that. He doesn't say, don't be afraid, take courage, and everything will work out like you want. Doesn't say that. That's not the promise. It's don't be afraid, take courage, I'm here. That's the promise. That's the assurance. The promise is his presence. And let me just pause here for a second and camp out just for a moment. Because I realize that there are some of you who are here today. And a long time ago, you walked away from God. Maybe you grew up in a home and you grew up in a religious home, or you grew up going to church or something like that, but a long time ago, you made a decision to walk away from it, and you're here again, and maybe because you're exploring it again and you're interested, or maybe you just came because someone invited you. I don't know. But for some of you, you walked away a long time ago from God, and the reason you walked away is because somewhere along the line, someone told you that if you just had enough faith, if you just didn't doubt, if you just prayed hard enough, if you just courageously got over your fears, that God would work out the things that you need worked out. And someone put a promise in Jesus' mouth that Jesus never made. And so you did it. And some of you, you prayed, and she still died. You didn't know what to do with that. And some of you, you prayed, and he still walked out on the family. And some of you, you prayed, and they never got over their addiction. And you prayed, and your parents never got back together. And because of that, you walked away from it all. But can I just encourage you, if that's you, I just want to invite you to explore Jesus again. But to explore Jesus on his own terms, because some of you, you may have walked away from Jesus because of a promise, because you held Jesus to a promise that Jesus never made. Because Jesus says, take courage. I'm here. Don't be afraid, because I'm here. And Jesus is not saying that you won't get dinged up along the way, that you won't have some pain. It's almost like Jesus saying, look, I got my own scars. I got some scars too. I have some wounds. And that is precisely why I can be trusted. Because I've walked through fear. And I've gotten dinged up a little bit, and I've got my scars and my wounds, and you can trust me, and you can follow me, and I will guide you through it. I can't promise you won't get some scars along the way too. But I can promise you I will be with you. And with that in mind, Jesus invites these disciples in this next statement to step out of their fear and into the unknown. Look what he says. He says, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. I'm sending you. Guys, you see that door over there? That locked door? You're going to have to walk out of it. I know it's safer in here. I know. But this isn't living. And you're not free. And so I'm sending you. I'm sending you. What is he sending them to do? Sending them to do what? He's sending them out to leave, to go outside, to demonstrate to the world and to announce to the world that there is a God of love who created you, that you have a heavenly Father who has crossed heaven and hell to get to you, who has gone through everything to bring you back to him, who has paid the ultimate price. And he's sending them to demonstrate that it is possible to live in right relationship with God, that it is possible to live in a thriving relationship with God, that it is possible to live in tune and in step with God. Jesus says, I'm sending you because I want everyone to know. But you're going to have to leave this room. And that's going to require some courage. And the reason it's going to require some courage is because if you're going to show people what it looks like to live in tune and to live in step with God, that means that you are going to face moments where you have to make choices that will not be like the choices everyone else around you is making. And if you're going to live in tune and in step with God, and you're going to take Jesus up on being sent, then that means there will be times where it feels like everyone around you is walking the opposite direction of which you're walking. Where everyone around you is walking, they're walking towards bitterness and they're walking towards revenge. You are walking towards grace and you are walking towards forgiveness. When everyone else around you sort of rallies their life around self-preservation, you orient your life around others. When everyone else around you uses their power and their influence and their money to build their own kingdom, to advance their own causes, you leverage all of your power and your influence and your resources to advance others, to demonstrate love. When everyone else around you cuts corners, you live with integrity and you tell the truth. Jesus says, that's why it's going to require courage. But don't be afraid. Take courage because I'm here. I'm sending you. I'm sending you out. And there's going to be a moment where you have to stand your ground, where you know God is nudging you towards what's right. But if you follow that nudge, it might bring some scars with it. Not everyone will understand because you'll be walking a different direction. Look, I just believe 100% that some of you are here today, and you know, you are in this moment right now. You know God is nudging you towards something. You feel God nudging you towards something in your life right now, and you are scared to death to follow through on it. Your knees are knocking a bit, and you need some courage. For some of you, you know that God is nudging you at this season in life. It's time to tell the truth. Because you've been sitting on something, and it's time to tell the truth. And you know it. And the way you know it is because your heart's probably beating a little bit faster even when you think about it. And for some of you, you know that God is nudging you. It's time. You need to return the money. You need to return the money. And for some of you, you know that God is nudging you to start recovery. But no one knows about the addiction. And you know that's going to mean you have to humble yourself, and your knees are knocking. But do not let your fear win out. Jesus says, I'm sending you. And yes, it may cost you something. Yeah, you may get some wounds and you may get some scars, but aren't the best stories always the ones around our scars? Because that means we lived. And we stepped and we risked and we did something. And this question looms over these disciples. Jesus says, I'm sending you. The question is, will they go? Will they step out with courage? Will they unlock that door and walk out? And the answer was yes. They did. They walked out of that room. And how do we know they walked out of that room? Because here we are today. And that fledgling Jesus movement on that Sunday evening all those years ago could have died and shriveled up had they stayed behind those locked doors. But they didn't. In fact, everything changed for them after that night. Because these very same men and women who are locked behind these doors, afraid, terrified, paralyzed by fear, some of them just a few months later are now willing to give their life because of what they have discovered in Jesus. And they did give their lives. Why? What shifted? Because it wasn't another teaching. They had all the teachings. It wasn't just another miracle. They saw the miracles. But that night, they met Jesus alive, who had beaten death. And when you have seen someone dead who is now alive, you lose your fear of death. And when you lose your fear of death, there's not much more that will scare you. And that's your story too. That's our story. So let me just ask you, what are you afraid of? Don't think in theory. I want you to think for your very real, your life right now. What's got your fears going? What's something, think about a circumstance. For some of you, is it a circumstance that you're in right now that's dredging up fears? What is it? What's got the what ifs going through your head right now? What are you afraid of? What's got you trying to exercise control so you can mitigate risk? What are you afraid of? For some of you, it's a choice that you know God is nudging you to make, and it terrifies you because you know it might bring some cost with it. But you also know it's right. What is it? What are you afraid of? And as you have that in your head right now, can I just tell you what your Savior would tell you? Don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here. Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here. I think it's fitting that we end this gathering by remembering the price that Jesus was willing to pay to lead us past our fears, to help us to quit fear, the distance he was willing to go, the sacrifice he was willing to make to free us to step courageously into the future. And so in just a moment, we're going to celebrate communion. And communion it's a tradition, it's a practice that Christians have been doing for centuries. And it's a way of remembering what Jesus has done for us on the cross. And so we take bread and it reminds us of Jesus' body, and we take a cup and it has juice and we remember that Jesus' blood was spilled out. And there's nothing magical about the bread. There's nothing magical about the juice. It's just bread. It's just juice. But there is something deeply powerful about what it represents. And so in just a moment, we're going to take bread and you're going to get some juice to remember this. And for those of you, if you're here and you don't know where you land on this whole Jesus faith thing, you don't have to participate, and that's fine. You can just pass it on. No one's even going to see. But part of what I would ask you is, man, why not become a Christian? Maybe that's the nudge that God's giving you, is to step out in faith for the very first time. And so we're going to give some space here in just a moment, because the New Testament says that before we take communion, just take some time and just reflect. And it says to allow God to examine our hearts. And for some of you are here and you're not a follower of Jesus, man, what are you waiting on? Maybe just take this time in a moment when we're just quiet. Just reach out to God. Just talk to God. Just say, Jesus, I need you. Jesus, please, I'm sorry. Just save me. Jesus, lead me towards the future with courage. I want to follow you. If you want to talk to someone more about that at all of our locations, you can go down to your left, and there's people who'd love to talk to you about that after this gathering. And then for the rest of us, if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, we're just going to take some moment, and we're going to take some time in a moment to be quiet and just ask God, God, I've been living in fear. Maybe it's your fears. God, I just want to hand this over to you. Let God examine. Let God just talk to God about what's going on in your life. Come clean if you need to with God. So we're going to take some time. Just be quiet. Give you some space to talk to God about what he's done for us. To ask God if there's anything in your life that you're holding on to that's keeping you from experiencing life in its fullness before we take communion. So let's just take a moment and let's be quiet and go to God.